Hello, everybody. So if you're here for the office hours, you're on the right forum. There's no fixed agenda, everybody. So we're just going to talk. And if you have questions, you're welcome to ask. Well, first of all, my name is Aakash Srinivasan. I'm guessing you're here because you saw some sort of an invite come out from Simpliaxis about office hours. So I do this once a month. It's a 60-minute forum where there's no fixed agenda. People just dial in, they ask questions. By profession, I'm an Agile Coach. I'm also a certified Scrum trainer with Scrum Alliance, which means I teach Scrum Master and Product Owner type courses. I have a lot of experience working in the Agile delivery side of things in different areas of Agile. You know, it's Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, Discipline Agile delivery. I worked in a bunch of different places, different organizations. So open forum. With that said, I'm going to shut up. And if anybody has a question, speak up. So for those of you who are not familiar with Scrum at all, it's a very simple framework that allows you to plan and execute in a certain cadence. There's a concept called sprints, which is a time box, which has a maximum allowed duration of a month. Anything less than that really depends on what you're trying to build and the volume of the batch size, the size of the team, the market conditions and things like that. But the short of it is that at the start of the time box, which means at the start of the sprint, you plan, just like you would for any other task using any other methodology, and then you execute. And at the end of that time box, you have a review with your stakeholders where you show them all the work that was done. You get feedback from them. Based on that feedback, you go into the final event of that sprint, which is called as a retrospective. You look at all that feedback in the retrospective. It's kind of like a lessons learned plus an analysis of what needs to change if we were to do this all over again, or as we continue in the next sprint or in the next time box, what are some things we can take forward and capitalize on or avoid doing, right? So that's the basic cadence of things. Now, it sounds like Rosemary's system is sort of Scrum plus some sort of a traditional sequential, highly siloed model where they have integration points with certain vendor partners. But I will say that if you're using Scrum, there are really only three artifacts that Scrum prescribes. One is the product backlog, which is like a big laundry list of every potential good idea that you can consider executing for that product, right? It's owned by the product owner. Think of it as a big requirements document that is not frozen, but it's dynamic. So it can change. So you can add to it and you can remove from it at any point in time, which means instead of trying to control the rate of change, you use the rate of change to your advantage, right? The second artifact you're going to have is a backlog, which is similar to the product backlog, except this time it's only going to have items that you're forecasting for a specific time box, like a sprint. So it's called as a sprint backlog. So think of this product backlog as a big list and a sprint backlog as a small list. The product backlog is owned by the person who owns the product. This person is going to prioritize stuff. They're going to own the budget. They're going to own the return on investment. They're going to own managing all of that backlog. And they're going to be the primary interface between the team and the rest of the world, whether the rest of the world is internal or external, right? So stakeholders, end users, customers, things like that. This person will be the product owner. So they own the product backlog. The developers or the engineers who are building all this stuff during the sprint, they own the sprint backlog. So basically what you do in your sprint is you take stuff from your larger list and you put it in the smaller list. And the smaller list is only going to have items that you're forecasting for that time box. Obviously, since it's a smaller list, you will have more detail. So the resolution view is higher in the sprint backlog, which means you have like volume of work, division of work, the estimates around it, additional documentation. Now, all this stuff in the sprint backlog is owned by the developers. So the product backlog is owned by the product owner. The sprint backlog is owned by the developers. And then the third artifact is the actual thing that you build, which if you're a tech company of some kind, then it's the actual software, right? The code that you're deploying to your production environment. If you're a hardware company, it's the actual fabricated device that you're selling out there. So those three are the prescribed artifacts that Scrum requires. Anything above and beyond, it really depends on the business and the company. There is no prescription as such. So if you need to add more documents in terms of, any activities that you would have, whether it's testing activities or programming activities or analysis activities or dependency management, synchronization, risk management, there is no prescription. But that doesn't mean that you don't do anything at all, right? So Scrum is basically a set of guardrails. It'll tell you do the bare minimum. And if you do the bare minimum, you've got a good set of guardrails in place that can help you plan, execute, review, retrospect, and then rinse and repeat again. You as a business or as a team need to be creative about thinking about how much of more documentation do we need? How many more meetings do we need? Do we need more integration points or less integration points? Do we need more collaboration or less collaboration? A lot of that stuff I would recommend you start to think about in your team agreements. right? So your team agreements is one of the things that you can add to your team dynamic in general. Now, a team agreement is obviously not just that we'll be nice to each other. That kind of goes without saying. You want to be nice to each other because you're working together. But more than that, right? So how are you going to deal with your stakeholders? What is your collaboration model going to look like within the team? Which means if you're spread across different geographical locations, what are your core working hours? What are your meeting hours? At what points of the day do you want to be left alone and have some heads down time so you can have some maker time where you can develop stuff, right? Similarly, your collaboration model or your communication model with your stakeholders. So outside your team, do you have regular dependencies with other people that need to be sequenced out or managed out? Do you have any integration points from either a system perspective or a business perspective or even from a tech perspective? Do you have any risks, any assumptions that you're making on a regular basis? Those kinds of coordinations, you can do them, you can customize them, as you want, depending on your team and your business. Agile as such will not give you any prescription on it, but there are a lot of options you can explore though. The thing about a WBS, for those of you who are not familiar with it, a WBS basically stands for a work breakdown structure. It's a breakdown of higher level work items into smaller detailed work items that will have estimated volume of work and potential deadlines around them. The concept, so this is a philosophical thing, right? The concept of a work breakdown structure is that it is meant to be a frozen static list of things. But if your scope is going to constantly change, then why would you go through the effort of laying out everything when you know some of that stuff is going to change anyway? So this is where your prioritization becomes so important, which means you might have a big laundry list of 50,000 things you want to develop. But in the next 1 month, what are the top 15 things? And the next 1 month after that, what are the next 15 things? And so what you want to do is gradually, as you start to build these in small batch sizes, every sprint or every time box, you take certain time away from your current sprint work and you peek ahead with a purpose, which means you go back to your backlog and you look at other set of things that you could be doing in the future. And so just like your velocity for delivering work every sprint will get better over time or will compound over time, your velocity for refining the line of sight for the future will also compound over time. And so in your first time box, you might be only looking one sprint ahead. But as you get to the second time box, third time box, fourth, fifth, sixth time box, right? You might be refining or you might be looking ahead 6 time boxes or 7 time boxes. That's how you gradually deepen the line of sight. It's project management 101 if you think about it. Forget Scrum and Agile or all that stuff, right? You're basically creating a fine-grained plan for the short term, but you're also taking some time away so you can think about the coarse-grained projection for the future. And so that's the sort of cadence you want to balance between looking at the here and now versus the up and about view of what else could be coming ahead.